Welcome to Indian Diaspora after a break of 3 weeks. Today we have a very interesting topic and very sensitive one, especially for today's India, the political future of Indian Muslims. It is a book written by Dr. Mujibur Rehman of Jamia Millia Islamia. The book's name is Shikwa Hind, and it is really getting traction. A lot of print is now they are going to be reprinted again. It's considered as one of the best books of the year there. The introductory remarks will be given by Dr. Elise Morgenstein first, who is the Associate Professor of Religion and Director of Humanities Center at the University of Vermont. She is a scholar of Islamic studies, especially of South Asia. She has written a lot of articles and books on Indian Muslims, on Indian Muslims, or rather on Islam, Indian Muslims, minorities, and 1857 rebellion. And she has written a very interesting book, A Muslim Bhagavad Gita, Abdul Rahman's interpretive translation, its implications. Another article is Shifting Boundaries, the Study of Islam in Humanities. A lot of other articles on South Asian Islam, and she's considered one of the experts. And right now she's at the University of Vermont. This concluding remarks will be given by Dr. Manan Ahmed, who is the Associate Professor of History. Faisal? Faisal? What's going on?
Mute to कर दिया मैंने. I don't know how they were able to unlock themselves. Check कर लेता हूँ.
Okay, sorry for that, for this disturbance. Make sure that nobody now then is able to come and do anything.
Yes, cover. She's not able to start.
Can we start now? This is
continue, Rajibai.
This is a drawback of this online things, but
Yep.
So sorry for all this.
Introductory speaker is having issues.
But start her video.
She is unable to start her video. I do not know what is the reason. But nonetheless, she is there, right?
Yeah, she's there, but she's having issues.
She has an issue that could be from her side. We do not know why she is unable to not open her video, because everybody else can do that. So let's move on. And so the concluding remark was saying that Dr. Manan Ahmed will be giving the concluding remarks after the talk is over. And he has written wonderful monograph for the books, especially for me, the Book of Conquest, Chashnama and the Muslim Origins in South Asia, Loss of Hindustan, the Invention of India, Disrupted City, etc., etc. So welcome you all. And now I invite Dr. Elise Morgenstein for the introductory remarks. So she is not able to start. She's unable to show her face, probably.
No, she's now. She just was able to.
Yes, she's right here. She is right here. Unmute.
Hang on. No. 1 second. She joined from the phone, so I'll have to make her a co-host.
Yeah.
Hang on.
Please do so.
Okay, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Yeah, unmute yourself, Dr.
Hi, are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for working through my technical difficulties. It seems on the device I'm blocked, and on this one I'm not. But let me jump right in if that's all right.
Please go ahead.
Thank you so much for having me and welcoming, and despite all of the issues, and allowing me to offer some truly introductory remarks about Shikwa Hind, the political future of Indian Muslims, which is both an important and generative work worthy of our Saturday mornings or afternoons or evenings, depending on where you're coming from. So thank you for being here to listen to all of us. Before I get into what I hope are brief and tone-setting comments, I just want to say thank you again for your attention. One of the reasons this conversation was exciting for me is precisely because the political future of Indian Muslims is not merely an India question. There can be no mistaking the global permutations of this question, of course, in our political lives and policies, but also within diasporic communities here in the US, but also in the UK, Australia, Canada, and beyond. How we might see this question, what the political future of Muslims, Indian Muslims is, and its myriad answers, obviously shifts depending on those locations. But the question still remains, what is this political future, or what are the political futures of Indian Muslims, especially in a moment of increasing global iterations of Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hostility, in the global rise of religious and conservative nationalisms, and at a moment where we might all, in our varying ways and in our respective communities, reasonably and with justification ask, how do we get out of the perniciousness of racializations and minorizations that threaten both our bodies and our body politics? What Dr. Rehman suggests is that our only answer to this question is one that addresses how Indian Muslims are able and allowed to relate to the state, which is to say, how does the Indian polity acknowledge, protect, and treat Muslims as equal stakeholders? This is not the same, as he's keen to suggest throughout this very detailed, meticulous book, as what do the laws say, or what do the ideals of a state say, but rather what are the practices, rhetorics, and governmental assemblages that structure the political lives of Muslims in India. Dr. Rehman asks us to imagine a political future in a political present where Muslims navigate, to paraphrase various points in his book, an increasingly irrelevant or perhaps even desiccated secular political world, and increasingly violent, and a political present that also enacts shifts that have been made possible through Hindu nationalism's more palatable, more popular, and more persistent presence. Dr. Rehman writes very early on in the book, I think it's on page 34, 36 or something, on paper, Muslims are citizens, but their rights, entitlements, and legitimate claims are fast eroding in a political space. Secular political parties paint them or see them as electoral liabilities. The less they talk about Muslims or their issues, the better their prospect of being appreciated by the majority. That's an end quote there. Later on, he outlines places where we see this political abandonment in the move from Muslims as citizens to Muslims as subjects, relentless targeting of Muslim women, the unending seeming conversation about quote unquote Muslim backwardness, and the physical, social, and political violence that is numerically increasing, and an experience for Muslims in India. In an attempt to keep my remarks very short, I'm going to leave out lots of fascinating points and just bullet point what I think we ought to be paying attention to. One of those bullet points is the process of minoritization, which is a crucial piece of Shekwa-i-Hind, and I would add its partner, racialization. So where minoritization is a process of disenfranchisement, how do we disenfranchise an entire group regardless of their demography? Racialization is a process of making a monolith out of a particular group. When those things work in tandem, we get situations, I would argue, and I have argued in other work, of contemporary Muslim experience. Politically disenfranchised, racially homogenized, and politically targeted for that identity and essentialization. One of the other questions I think is really fascinating in this book, and that I really hope Dr. Rehman talks about today, is the question of secularity and secularism itself. So while I see minoritization and racialization undergirding the entirety of this work, I'm really quite curious about whether or not secularization or secularism have as much to say as we think they might. So what are the values and limits of secularism in our analysis and commentary on Indian politics? Because one of the things that is being argued in this book is that Indian Muslims fall out of political rhetoric as real people or groups, regardless of which political parties are talking. Rehman suggests that for obvious reasons, parties and politicians and the Hindu right use Muslims as rhetorical devices, straw men, boogeymen, a basic us versus them argument here. But what he's suggesting also that's fascinating is that secularist parties, notably Congress, of course, but not alone, when they do wade into this fray of conversation, we are often seeing them ignore serious and legitimate complaint that Indian Muslims have to offer India, either structurally or individually. So I'm curious about what work secularism does here. Is it properly secularism that we're talking about? What does secularism obscure or invite? Who is it protecting or not? And is it accurately capturing this landscape? Or is something else going on? I was reminded throughout Shikwai Hind of the work of Winifred Sullivan, famously the author of The Impossibility of Religious Freedom. She's an American historian of religious freedom law. And she argues in that book that small p Protestantism is a better way to describe the American landscape than secularism. Small p Protestantism is a cousin of capital P Protestantism, which would be the religious affiliation. Small p Protestantism, she suggests, is this way of talking about Protestant Christian values, norms, and assumptions that permeate an American legal and political landscape without actually being nameably religious. So I guess I'm curious if the polity of India could be phrased as a small h Hinduism, or is there something better going on? In any event, I hope that my very brief, very quick remarks have demonstrated that Dr. Rehman's work is both careful and critical. It has begged many, many questions for me, and I know I'll be learning from it for years to come, because it's asking readers to think about the past as we, I hope, collectively seek a future where Indian Muslims enjoy more rights, more protections, and more political representations, if not numerically, then foundationally. My reads and glosses can only be mine, so perhaps it's unsurprising for those familiar with my work that I'm enthralled by both the thorough history and implications of these processes and ideologies that have specific valences in India, but I'm most fascinated by its broader applications beyond. So join me in shifting our attention from my goofy face to Dr. Rehman, and we all have a minute to learn from him.
Thank you. Now your turn, Dr. Rehman.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Forrest, for such a generous introduction, and thanks to Professor Manan Ahmed for agreeing to be a discussant on my presentation, and everybody else who has attended or attending this particular presentation over here. This is, I do not know, and more importantly, thanks to Raji Sahab and his colleagues who are running this show for now 3-4 years or so, and I had the pleasure of participating in this several times as a part of as part of various panels. And this is the first time I'm going to make a presentation on my book. So this is a book talk. So I always thought it's always easy to do a book talk because you already written it, so you can summarize and say things. And then having delivered several book talks, I have realized that it's not as easy as one generally feels. So I've tried to be very selective and develop a kind of framework where I will basically try to share some of the key arguments, and then we will open up for discussion. And during a discussion in the parliament once, the Congress president, Mr. Kharge, was criticizing Mr. Modi, and he said, "You are not doing anything new. The only thing that you're doing well is that you are able to market it very well." So as part of the marketing strategy, I'm going to be quite selective so that you have a fairly good idea about what the book is about, and also there is interest to buy the book, which is also another purpose of delivering the book talk. As you all know, India has changed with no disrespect for anybody who is from Bengal. There was a time when people used to say that what Bengal thinks today, India thinks tomorrow. And I think that has changed now. What we have is what Gujarat thinks today and India thinks tomorrow. And that is how Indian politics has changed significantly. And at the heart of that is the question of Indian Muslims, how they are treated. And there is a widespread concern, and there are a lot of scholarship and commentaries on this particular question. My book is one of them. And as I often say, I'm one of the 200 million experts who is speaking on Indian Muslims, because everybody has a view. And I'm trying to explain why my view makes some sense. Now, there's a question that Manan Sahab and Raji Sahab asked, and which is generally a question. A lot of people who, whenever they pick up the book, they obviously remember Poet Iqbal because the title is Sikwai Hind. And I must confess that this is not the title that I really wanted to give it. It was the publisher who wanted. They gave me a couple of options, and this was the one I chose. My central argument, my title was The Political Future of Indian Muslims, and I'll try to explain what I really meant by that. So it was not my intention to present myself as a modern day Iqbal. That was definitely not. If you start looking at my book from that vantage point, very likely you will end up misinterpreting the entire analysis. The only thing that I have common with Mr. Iqbal is that I studied in Heidelberg and I'm an alumni, and he was also an alumni of Heidelberg University, Germany. Other than that, there is not much beyond that. But another thing I want to reveal here in response to the question that Dr. Forrest raised regarding secularism, about which I'll, of course, answer in the later part of my presentation. This is a book which is part of a trilogy. This is the first volume. My second volume I'm working on is on Islamophobia, basically trying to argue how Indian version of Islamophobia is qualitatively different from the Western Islamophobia, dealing with the history and all of that about of it. And then the third volume is about question of secularism in India, why secularism could not work out, and what are the conditions required for India to become a secular state or secular society. And that's the third volume. As towards the end of the book, I argue that it's only in the secular politics that the minority rights are fully secured. And therefore, Muslim rights, Muslims for their rights and for their dignity, India has to be a thoroughly secular society. So I was hesitant to announce this, but I thought I should announce this. Then there will be a public pressure on me to work on this and come out with this book in the next couple of years and to complete the trilogy. Now, about the book, those who have seen the book, they know that the book has 6 chapters besides introduction and conclusion. The chapters deals with different dimensions of it. The most significant part of it is that this is probably the first book on Indian Muslims which has an exclusive chapter in Muslims in South. Large number of books on Indian Muslims written by prominent scholars often allude to this fact or claim that Muslims in South are distinctly different, and you know, they write few sentences or few paragraphs, and there is never a detailed analysis on that. So while working on the book, at one point of time, the government of India decided to ban a political entity called Indian Popular Front, and which had a significant base in South but was operating all over India. And at that time, I thought, well, if I have to write Indian Muslims, then I have to write something about this particular organization and their activities and their relationship with the state and why state is hostile to them and what implication it has for Indian Muslims and all of that. So I decided that I would write a separate chapter on Muslims in South, and that delayed the book by almost 8 months or so. So there are other chapters, you know, there is a chapter on violence and women and the backwardness debate, and of course, most importantly, Shahin Bagh movement and its implications on the citizenship debate. And now, there are many ways that scholars and commentators who work on India or write on India, they look at this development with respect to the rise of Hindutva politics or majoritarian politics and the Muslim question. One way they look at it, or rise of BJP, they look at it, one dominant framework is that BJP is a political party. Its ambition is to capture power, and it contests and participates in local processes, and it operates within the constitution, and that's what it is about of it. I differ from that particular framework of analysis. I don't look at BJP as a normal political party like other political party. I look at BJP as a political party which is here driven by a particular ideological agenda, therefore very identical to an ideological movement. So what we are witnessing over last 40 years and more seriously, systematically in last 10 years plus, is an ideological power struggle that is going on within Indian society. As I often say, Narendra Modi and Jawaharlal Nehru happen to be the 2 most ideological prime ministers in modern India. Jawaharlal Nehru wanted to push the country towards the left, and Narendra Modi has tried to push the country towards the right and quite successfully has done so, and that project is ongoing. And to understand Muslim question and what is happening to Muslims, one has to see this power struggle and make sense of it. Now, for that, for a better sense of it, one has to really go back at least 100 years. One has to go back and look at the ideological landscape of India in the 1920s. When we look at ideological landscape of India or political landscape of India of 1920s, we come across there are three dominant political forces. One was represented by Congress on the left, and all these three forces had common objective. They were fighting against the colonial power. Congress and others, they wanted to build a secular India where people of all religions can live together. Then there was Muslim League, which wanted to carve out a separate country for Muslims because it argued that Hindu and Muslims cannot live together, and which is famously known as two-nation theory. And then there was Hindu Right, which wanted to build a country because it believed that both Muslims and Britishers, they're all outsiders, so India need to be free, and their project of Hindu Rashtra, which required a very different kind of an ideological power struggle. So all these three forces had common objective of kicking out the Britishers, but each of them had their own vision of India once the Britishers depart. Now, by 1940s, we see the first two forces were reasonably successful. There was a creation of Pakistan, even if Muhammad Ali Jinnah was very unhappy and described it as a moth-eaten one. And then there was Congress Party, which accepted partition and came out with a constitution which is multicultural and which ensured equal rights for Indian Muslims. And there was Hindu Right, which was very, very marginal. And in last 75 years, these Hindu Right and the various organizations of Hindu Right, I broadly say it is Hindu Right because there are various organizations who are involved in it, from RSS to BJP to Mahasabha to all kinds of organizations in different parts of India. They systematically worked according to the rules established by secularists and have outsmarted them, they have emerged as a hegemonic political force today in Indian politics and likely to remain so for several years. So one has to understand this in order to understand what is unfolding in the name of Muslims and in the name of Hindu nationalism in modern India today. The key term of the book is, of course, called the term or the phrase called the political future. Let me share a few words. What do I really mean by political future? Now, future or the general future of Indian Muslims has been a matter of concern by scholars and politicians for years. And there are many important works that's written about it. For instance, S. Abid Hussain wrote a book called The Destiny of Indian Muslims. And there are others who have directly or indirectly basically addressed this question of general future. Now, the general future has got several components. It addresses economic future. It talks about cultural future, for instance, regarding the future of Urdu language or various other identity-related issues. And political future is something that deals with the relationship of Muslims with respect to the state and their rights. And that's how I define political future. So Sachar Committee is a classic example which documents the economic conditions and therefore addresses the question of economic future of Indian Muslims. Now, the argument is that if your political future is not ensured, then other forms of future, whether economic and cultural, they become inconsequential. And what we witness today and why there is so much of concern among Indian Muslims is this, that their political future, which is primarily their equality, their position as equal citizens in the society, is impacted or adversely experienced by a lot of people. And as many come across, that there are increasingly two kinds of laws emerging, one for Indian Muslims and one for rest of Indians, say for instance, bulldozer justice and others. So therefore, that's the argument. The argument is that Muslims should ensure that they are politically equal, and that is unsettled with the rise of Hindu nationalists or Hindu nationalism in politics. And once that, so far, if they do that, then their other futures could be addressed. Otherwise, they will not be, because if they are not politically equal, then there will be no obligation on the part of the state to address other issues, whether that deals with the economic situations or cultural situations. So when they are politically equal, then the state has an obligation to address that. Otherwise, they are left at the mercy of those who govern the state. So that's the central argument, and there I differ from other analysis. Now, one of the ways this political future is impacted is in a manner that Bharatiya Janata Party has tried to muzzle or weaken or diminish the political voice of the community. And this is reflected in the representation process. The decision not to field Muslim candidates in parliament and assemblies, as a result of which governments after governments in various states where BJP is the ruling party or the national government, we don't have a single Muslim who happens to be a member of the cabinet. Muslims are not in the member of the cabinet because they are not member of assembly or they are not member of parliament, as a result of which they cannot be the member of cabinet. So in the political decision-making processes, they are deliberately excluded. Now, the question of Muslim underrepresentation in these major bodies is an old story. And there is a long history of it. Even during the era when the BJP was not even a political party before 1980, there was underrepresentation of Indian Muslims in these bodies. Then in what sense this particular form of underrepresentation is different? The difference is this, that there was underrepresentation in the pre-BJP era, but in this particular case, there is a deliberate policy on the part of BJP not to field Muslim candidates. And that has become a kind of an electoral strategy, as many argue, to polarize the society. Now, even in the last election, BJP fielded only one candidate in Kerala, and BJP was absolutely certain that that particular candidate was not going to win. And in the parliament, once the election was over, in the first session, in the maiden session of the parliament, there were a lot of political parties, supposedly secular political parties, they raised their concerns. And that has fallen on deaf ears of the present government. Though we come across, there are several Muslims quite active in Indian media. You see them as spokesperson, people like Poonawalla, Sajia Ilmi, and others. And they are very active spokesperson of BJP, but even they are not considered to be included in the cabinet. And of course, these are the Muslims who are very different because they are not going to represent secular politics or minority rights. What they are, I describe them as, they are all agents of Hindutva. That's how I describe them. Now, an interesting development happened in 2022. In the National Executive Meeting in Hyderabad, Prime Minister came out with a profound statement by showing concerns about a specific category of Muslims, which he calls the Pasmanda Muslims. Now, it's almost now more than 2 years, and there are several elections that have happened after that announcement. There was state elections in Karnataka and elsewhere in Himachal Pradesh, in Maharashtra, and of course we had national election, and now we have an election coming up on 5th of February in New Delhi. On the one hand, Prime Minister has expressed, BJP has shown some concerns about Pasmanda Muslims, but there was never an effort to field these people as candidates, Pasmanda Muslim candidates. So some have argued that this whole thing is basically to divide and rule the Muslim community. And in my analysis, I look at this particular attempt to come out with this particular term called Pasmanda Muslims and this particular category, basically trying to argue that there is a section of Muslim elites or Muslim upper caste who have appropriated and benefited tremendously during the so-called era of appeasement, and there are these people who are left behind and largely exploited by their fellow Muslims. That's the kind of an argument that is being developed. In my analysis, why BJP or Hindu right is very keen to play with this particular term is because that there has been tremendous amount of concern by various Western governments and bodies. And this particular attempt is basically to pacify them, say that we are also concerned about them, but we are particularly concerned about this most backward section of Muslim community. Now, the question is this: why is it that the question of representation is important? In liberal democracy, representation matters. One would argue the general argument of Hindu right, and this has been articulated by many of its prominent leaders, both inside parliament and outside parliament, that we don't need secularism, because secularism is all about vote bank politics. Secularism is all about Muslims. Secularism is all about, in any case, it is flawed, and it is all about appeasement and pampering and all of that stuff. What we need is a good Hindutva politics. And good Hindutva politics is all embracing, and it will do good for all communities, including Muslims. After all, we Hindus are very, very nice people, and these Muslims have been here for hundreds of years, and their masjids are standing, and they are enjoying all kinds of freedom. And compared to minorities in elsewhere, say in Pakistan and Bangladesh, our Muslims here are becoming presidents and all of that about of it. So Hindutva is the real solution to the Indian politics, and that is what that will ensure the welfare of Indian Muslims as well. So therefore, Muslims should not be there in parliament or assembly, because we are genuinely nice people and we're looking after them. Why the hell that they should be there? There is no necessity for it. Now, we have to think about it, that why representation is important. Muslim representation is important, almost the way that Dalit representation is important. There are always men who say that my mother happens to be a woman, my wife is a woman, I have daughters and they are women. So I know their problem. So therefore, we don't need women representation because I know their problem. But no feminist would ever agree with that particular argument, because women representation on its own is important, because there are issues and problems of women which women alone could be able to represent. And therefore, Muslim representation is very central in this particular exercise of liberal democracy. Now, in what sense and ground, or in policy arena, this would make a difference? In recent months, there has been a big debate going on what is called the Waqf bill. There is an attempt by the present government in order to come out with a bill. In my own assessment, and I have done a lead article for Frontline magazine on this particular issue, and Frontline came out with a special issue on this called War on Waqf. And my argument is that in the present bill, they are trying to remove something called Waqf by use. So there are hundreds of properties in different parts of India, particularly in urban India, where people don't have deeds. The community does not have deeds because they are there for hundreds of years. So all those things were allowed as Waqf property because they are Waqf by use. For instance, Kabristan or a Dargah or a masjid, all of that. So government is planning, in this bill, the government is trying to remove Waqf by use practice. So if you cannot produce a document, then the property goes to the state. So if you look at the public debate, in the existing situation of very diminished number of member of parliaments and diminished number of assembly members, the debate has been far less vigorous and far less significant. It would be qualitatively different if there were an adequate number of representation. I'll give you another small example. There has been a lot of riots that's been going on. Nowadays, in past several years, we have noticed invariably there is a connection between processions and festivals and riots and then bulldozer justice in various parts of India. In past couple of months, we had two major riots that took place. One took place in Baharich and the other took place in Sambal. And if you look at how the state and the parliament and assembly has responded to these two violence, you will come across there is a qualitative difference. In a way, Sambal issue is addressed in a manner that Baharich violence is addressed. There is more noise and more voice concern for Sambal violence. For instance, Rahul Gandhi paid a visit to Sambal. There were issues in parliament. Priyanka and others, they raised this issue. The reason, in my analysis, the major reason for this is that in Sambal, the member of parliament happens to be a Muslim, Mr. Rehman. Whereas in Baharich, there is no powerful Muslim representative. So here is a Muslim member of parliament who is able to mobilize opinions at different levels, and which is one of the major reasons why this particular issue has acquired so much of attention in our national debate. So representation therefore makes a significant difference, Muslim representations, and that's important, and that is something that has deliberately reduced as part of almost a policy by the Hindu right governments and Hindu right political parties. And this is ironical, particularly because we live at a point of time where we have a person of Indian origin recently served as the Prime Minister of Britain. We have a person of Indian origin as a spouse or Vice President of America. We have a person of Indian origin going to be the Prime Minister of Canada. And if you look at all of this, then here are the Muslims who have been living in this country for thousands of years, and they are not allowed to represent themselves. That speaks a lot about what kind of democracy India has become or likely to become in future. Now, I would like to comment on another aspect of it, which is part of my central argument. Analysis of Indian Muslims is largely done as part of minority rights. Anything that happens to Indian Muslims in adverse terms is being argued as violations of minority rights. And I differ with that particular formulation. When you look at what is unfolding in India with regard to Muslims, almost every aspect of Muslim life is subjected to scrutiny. How they dress, what they eat, the legality of dargah and masjid and qabristan and all of that about it. Everything is a problem because Muslim is a problem. You don't come across legality of religious structures for other religion being discussed, even if it is not very difficult for any ordinary traveler or ordinary visitor in India or ordinary resident of India to notice that there are multiple structures in every city of non-Muslim community which probably do not have adequate legal support or legal foundation. But that's not a part of a public debate. That's not a concern on the part of the state. Whereas in case of Muslims, this is a regular concern. And of course, then there is a concern what is being presented now, and in my view, that is likely to acquire more significance in the months to come. A new term has been coined recently called civilizational justice. This is with respect to this whole debate that is going on, or whole process that is going on, that most mosques in India, particularly old mosques of India, were basically built after the destruction of the Hindu temples. And it is important to fix all of this instead of limiting to those three primary controversial one. One is addressed in Ayodhya, the Mathura and Banaras, and the rest, there are thousands and thousands of them. So that has to be addressed. Only by addressing that, India can be able to address what is being called the civilizational justice. This write-up came up a couple of weeks ago in Organizer, which is the mouthpiece of RSS. Now, so these are the questions which is directly impacting the Muslim conditions. So therefore, I argue that what we witness today, isn't it not just a case of minority rights violation? What we are witnessing today is what I call is a de-Islamization process. So there is an attempt to formulate the political project in a way where Muslim no more, Islam no more, and Muslim to be contained. That remains the central underlying objective of this project. Now, one of its major manifestation that we witnessed in the passage of what is called the citizenship law, where Muslim community is the only community which is prevented or which is excluded from the list from seeking citizenship in India, on the ground that Pakistan and Afghanistan and Bangladesh are Muslim countries. So since they are Muslim countries, there can't be discrimination against Muslims. So therefore, we should not have it. So when the debate was going on in the parliament, when the Home Minister was introducing that particular bill, someone in the parliament asked the Home Minister, what about Rohingyas? You know, Rohingyas come from Burma, so why can't we give citizenship to Rohingyas? Then the Home Minister said, well, Rohingyas passed through Bangladesh. Since they passed through Bangladesh, therefore they become almost Bangladeshi. And so therefore they should be denied. They should not be included, since we are not giving citizenship to Bangladeshis and Bangladeshi refugees, so Muslim refugees of Bangladesh, so therefore they should also be denied. Now, if you look at political developments worldwide, you would come across there is a remarkable achievement that India has in foreign policy that very few countries in the world could be proud of. whether it is Gaza, Israel, or whether it is Ukraine or Russia, you will come across in all these places when Indians are stranded, India was successfully able to negotiate with warring nations and rescue all these Indians, whether they're students or they were working, back to India. And it's an extraordinary achievement that India has done in recent years. Now, if India is genuinely concerned about Rohingyas, then India could easily fly a few planes to Burma directly and prevent them from going to Bangladesh and bring them. If the purpose of having the Citizenship Act is basically to address the issue of religious persecution in and around India. So that basically tells that the purpose is that anything that has to do with the Muslims or anyone who happens to be a Muslims, so they are to be prevented from any side. So that's the point I wanted to make. Now, how many minutes I have?
How many minutes you have? You have another 15 minutes.
Okay, all right. So now the other thing that I wanted to draw attention to is Muslim identity is a historically dense identity. It is not like Indian diaspora in America, for instance. So when you talk about Muslims or refer to Muslims in public conversation or private conversations, so there is somebody who will see Aurangzeb in you, somebody will see Shahrukh Khan in you, or somebody will see something else about it. There's highly multi-layered and historically dense identity. So as a result of which, one of the arguments that is made about Indian Muslims is this, Indian Muslims have done a lot of bad things because India was under Muslim rule for years and years, for hundreds of years. And during these hundreds of years, a lot of violence and atrocities Muslims have committed. And therefore, it is time to fix a lot of these things about it. And as a result of which, one of the things that we have witnessed in recent years is this lot of cities which were named by or established by Muslim rulers, they are all renamed. Allahabad, for instance, is renamed, and a lot of other cities have remained. And that's also part of what I call the de-Islamization process. So the argument against Muslim equality or equality for Muslims is made on this ground that Muslims have done a lot of bad things. And they continue to do a lot of bad things. For instance, they're having large family size and they're trying to overpopulate India. They're all part of Hindu right campaign, and they're basically violent people. And besides the fact that they eat cow, which we worship. So all these are the reasons why one should not really sympathize or argue for their equality, that they should be treated as equal conditions. As equal citizens, and so there is this whole demonization campaign that goes on, and is being this campaign at a different levels, at various organizations, through various organizations, and also as part of various state policies and all of that about it. Now the question is this: that consider for a moment that there is a community which has got a bad past, or there are people in the community who have done bad things. Is that enough to deny the entire community equal rights? So there I apply this particular phrase by Hannah Arendt called "Right to have rights," which is the title of one of my chapters. That regardless of what some people have done of that particular community, the community still has rights. And therefore, the rights cannot be taken away, and they should not be collectively punished just because that there was an Aurangzeb or there was a Babur or something else about it, or there is Islamic radicalism or terrorism or whatever. So there are a lot of these factors about it. So that's an argument I have tried to develop in this particular. I think the chapter 2 basically elaborates on that particular argument. And so that's the now on the question of Shaheen Bagh. It's very important because I have received some criticism by a lot of some people that I have not been very fair in terms of my narrative or discussion on Shaheen Bagh. Now let me try to address this. The Manoj Jha, who is a member of parliament from RJD party, who was part of my panel discussion in the book launch, he raised this question. He said that you are not adequately fair to the Shahin Bagh movement. Now, Shahin Bagh movement is an extraordinary accomplishment. There is no doubt about it. My take has been slightly different. I'm not questioning the inspiration that the movement, the source of inspiration it has become, and for scholarship. And there are still people in different parts of the world who are still writing dissertations on Shahin Bagh movement and all of that about it. And of course, it's a great story from the point of view of role of Muslim women in society, who are criticized ever since Sahabanov thing has happened in India and all of that about it. But the point is this: Indian Muslim population is roughly around 200 million plus, which is more than the population of France and Germany put together. Right? If for a moment you think that then India is undivided, consider that there was no partition of India, what would have been the Muslim population in this continent or in this country? Roughly would be around 650 plus. 200 Pakistan, 150 plus in Bangladesh, and then diaspora put together. So imagine an India with close to 700 million Muslims and 800 plus or 900 non-Muslims. And you can imagine what kind of polity that India would have at this point of time. But that's more a thought experiment. But the point I wanted to make is this, that was that a movement that basically reflected the power of 200 million people. Imagine France and Germany together organizing a political movement and what kind of impact it would have. Now, compare the same movement with the farmers' movement. And some of us who visited both the movements, the infrastructure and the resources that are used in farmers' movement and the resources that are used in Shahin Bagh movement, you'll see there is a significant difference. And then the end result, the farmers' movement was able to force Narendra Modi for the first time in his life to withdraw the policy for whatever reasons. Whereas Shahin Bagh movement eventually did not succeed in changing the citizenship law. The citizenship law was passed the way it was designed by the BJP government in the parliament about it. But that does not, of course, take away the fact or the credit that people give to the Shahin Bagh movement, which is clearly it was very, very inspirational. And in a manner that things were unfolding in India at that point of time, for the first time, we saw that Indian media started reporting on movement with some courage. And so that was a big source of inspiration and a great accomplishment, that Indian media was able to gather courage to report on Shahin movement and write about it, raising questions and all of that about it. So those were all the positives about it. But in terms of the quantum of impact, one comes across a significant difference. And that's the reason why it happened and how it happened is something that is a matter of concern, and which I have tried to analyze in the conclusion and others, that there is a need for more and more politicization of Muslim community and more and more active interests, because Muslim elites, as I argue, are highly depoliticized. And whether the big faces or big names in Bollywood or industry and others, you don't see these people showing any concern about either Muslims or general failings of Indian democratic rights or Indian democratic society. They're all tight-lipped. Once Nasiruddin Saha gave a statement, someone asked Nasiruddin Saha, why are these Khans not making statements about all these things happening? But then they say, well, they have achieved so much. If they would open their mouth, then they will run into all kinds of problems, particularly ED and all of that about it, or their professional career would be negatively impacted. So consider for a moment, had Gandhi thought that he had a legal career, and if he would mess with the colonial government, his legal career would suffer, then we would have probably stayed in under colonial rule even today. So the question is this: if people with resources, with education, if they cannot take positions, if not on a regular basis, it's not I'm saying that you have to participate in local politics, then obviously that threatens the moral fiber of the society, that threatens the democratic energy of the society. and that empowers authoritarian tendencies and authoritarian forces. And that's precisely what we witness. It is not that the Muslim community is completely deprived of, this. You cannot compare Indian Muslim community with Dalits, and I am not somebody who agrees with that formulation. For the simple reason is this: Muslim community historically has been a multi-class community. There is always some rich, there is a middle class, and there is poor. Whereas Dalits were not historically a multi-class community. It's only after last 70 years, ever since the affirmative action policy was followed, Dalit community is emerging as a multi-class community, but still it is very, very different as opposed to both quantitatively and qualitatively as opposed to Muslims in India. Now let me I'll just conclude here, and before that I'll just answer the question of Dr. Forrest concerning secularism. The other 2 points I'd make, and then I'll stop. What is the central problem, or what do I substantively mean by political future? In substantive terms, what I'm trying to basically saying is this equality condition is unsettled, and it is the political equality which is the future, and which is the one which requires to be defended and protected and preserved. Now, historically, if you look at India, India has this historic problem with equality question. And you see that with respect to castes, the caste equality, that's a central problem of Indian society. You see that with respect to religion. You see that with respect to gender. So historically, if there is one particular problem that India has and not able to deal with it, it is a question of equality. The Indian Constitution has some promises for it, but again, that is not adequately implemented, and we come across the present situation because of those failures. Now, there is a very powerful slogan recently been given by a prominent politician from Uttar Pradesh, Batoge to Katoge. And this particular slogan had different shapes and forms, was echoed during Maharashtra elections by Prime Minister as well as by the RSS chief. It's essentially an appeal for fraternity, and but without addressing the issue of equality. For instance, when the Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister makes a statement, Batoge to Katoge, there is no explanation or understanding what is the relationship between Thakurs and the Dalits. So the equality part is evaded in that particular slogan. Of course, there is a particular context that's been said about it. So basically, there is an attempt to create a fraternity without addressing the issue of equality. So any attempt to create fraternity without addressing the issue of equality can never be a substantive fraternity, right? So that's exactly what the problem is. And that is the larger problem in which the Muslim question is also located. So what we witness today is that there is an ideology which is emerging and systematically penetrating in different organizations and advancing in different corners of society, which is accepting non-equal conditions and non-equal relationship among citizens and people of different religions as normal. And I think that's where the real problem lies. And since hierarchy and non-equal conditions are seen normal, and therefore violence is seen as normal about it. And of course, in a manner that the violence is dealt with, that's also another thing about it. Now, coming to the question of secularism. Well, my own argument has been that India was never a secular society. We have always been a very, very deeply religious society. And we all know that the word secular appeared in 1975. It was not there even in the Constitution. But there was a constitutional aspiration to build India as a secular society. That aspiration was there as part of the constitutional ambition about it. But otherwise, we were very, very a religious society. Since you're a historian, and anybody who studies Indian history knows that there is this, Mr. Anderson in his book Indian Ideology makes fun of it, how Nehru, was using all these Brahminical practices in the inauguration and all of that about it. And we saw similar kind of things when the new parliament was inaugurated. And there is a beautiful paper that was written by Bhikkhu Parekh many years ago when he was in Hull, showing that how religious symbolism is very central and is part of India's both public and private life. But secularism from the point of view of Hindu-Muslim equality, what we witnessed until the dominance of BJP is this: there was some kind of a symbolic secularism, and which is being argued as appeasement policy, as a result of which Indian Muslims, some Muslims could become the president, but nobody wanted them as prime minister. And in my book, I try to argue that Muslims would be normal and their rights would be equal only when a Muslim child can also be the prime minister of India. And now, so what symbolic secularism has done is this: it has produced few Muslim elites. Though in substantive terms, in terms of economic consequences, a significant number of Indian Muslims have remained as backward. And so they never benefited either from the state intervention or from the economic reform policy. Because Gopal Singh panel was published in 1984, which is an official policy, when the Nehruvian state was basically running the show. And the Sachar report was published almost 15 years after the economic reform policy was introduced. So you come across identical results when it comes down to Muslims in both the report. So therefore, there was a symbolic secularism that was practiced, whose significant benefit is that the Muslims were visible and they were able to occupy important positions, and it produced a handful number of Muslim elites in different walks of life. And that has been the only benefit of it. Now, of course, I argue that the revival, there are a lot of lessons to be learned, that how secular polity of India failed and all of that, and that I discuss, and I can come back to that question during Q&A. Can I stop it here now?
Sure. So let us hear Dr. Manan Ahmed for his concluding remarks, and after that we will have the question and answer session. Manan sir.
Ji, thank you so much, Raji Saab, and thank you to Mujib for this fascinating and important book. I learned a lot. I both as a historian of medieval and early modern period, but also as someone who is interested in this question of minorizations in the longue durée. And I think the main points that I wanted to highlight in our conversation, in his presentation, he has kind of gestured at it, which is the impossibility of the political life for a Muslim citizen. And of course, the word citizen is under quotes, as we know in the kind of CEA and NRC post those laws. So what does that mean to look at the impossibility of political life, and why political life over economic, social, or religious, cultural life? And I think the most convincing, and not that anything is not convincing in the book, but the most powerful intervention that I see this book making, Shikwai Hind making, is that it makes it central that the political question is the question that has to come before we get to answer any other question. And the way that Rehman is making that argument is, of course, to kind of think about the representational aspect of the political question. But, Muslims who are, as many of you know more than I do, are, are roughly 15%. But the latest kind of figures that I was able to look through is that there are only 3% of Muslim representation in the Indian administrative service. There is only 1 or 2% of Muslim representation in the Indian foreign services, only 4% in Indian police services. So what you have is not just that the political order, but the bureaucratic state and the civil state are also completely devoid of any Muslim representation, even if the representation is pegged at the 14% of population, that 15% of the population. And of course, the question of precarity of being in the lowest or the lowest third percentile in terms of wage earners or in terms of household looms very large. Now, in the book, Rehman is in a very, I think, important way for political theory, looks towards apartheid South Africa, looks towards the African American condition in the United States, and Amir Mufti's thoughts on the Jewish question and its relationship to the Muslim question, and to see what parallels one can think of and to draw upon. And I see a couple of problems with any comparative question. Now, first and foremost is the question of racial difference. And I understand the race caste dynamic, but for the population, for the African American population in the United States, the question of the color line, as W.E.B. Du Bois formulates, remains central. It remains central from the question of slavery to the Jim Crow to the civil rights movement. So the color line is a line that, you know, is analogous to the colonized line, as Fanon and Aimé Césaire would later on argue, but it remains substantial in order to think of difference. The question of the Jewish minority in Europe, as well as the South African white minority, is that we are also in those minorizations, the arguments are built around a question of political or economic domination. So the anti-Semitic idea that the Jews are controlling the world, which was very important for the fascism, the Nazi fascism. And of course, the material wealth that the white South African had and continue to have in many ways, even post post-apartheid state. So what we have here is a rather unique kind of placement, where a very small minority, 14%. 15%, is being demonized, being de-Islamized, when they do not have any actual control. They, even rhetorically, the civilizational, what Rehman mentions in his comments today, the kind of civilizational justice argument that is being obligated, has to go back 800 years or 1,000 years. Because if you are an Indian citizen today and you look around, the Ambanis and everyone else who is ruling the world, they're not Muslims. There's no claim that it's the Muslim who is oppressing present day Hindu. The claim is that, you know, at some point 500 years ago or 800 years ago, blah, 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 right? I use blah, blah, blah because I want to make that a derogatory understanding, that this is not a serious argument that at least a historian needs to kind of think through. So this makes to me, because of there's no ethnic or racial difference. There is no question of domination in economic or political terms. What it is this idea of religion. Now, religion again is I say, learning from this book isn't quite clear, because as the book makes a point, and as we see that the Modi or the BJP is able to have great relationships with the UAE or with Saudi Arabia or with Indonesia or other places, even the Indian American community here has many supporters, Indian Muslims who are many supporters. So in other words, it's not religion per se, it's not Islam per se everywhere in the world. Even the BJP government now or ever has not taken a stance that it is in a crusade against Islam and it represents any kind of no. That's absolutely not the case in foreign policy or in other venues of economic policy. In the book, Rehman makes the case that, you know, the way that the slurs are used, like go to Pakistan. No one says go to Bangladesh, even though Bangladesh is a Muslim country on the border just as much as Pakistan, not to mention Afghanistan. So there's something, again, unique about the question of Islam, and that question cannot be subsumed to generic Islamophobia. Obviously, the Hindu right has drawn great strength from the post 9/11 world and from the attack on the parliament and the attack on the Taj Hotel and other things, and Kashmir is twisted or seemed in a question of Muslim nationalism rather than a question of Kashmiri nationalism. All that being said, I do think that the case of the Indian Muslim is unique because it doesn't actually fit many of these. And that I feel like was the strength of this book, that it allows us to say there is something actually quite concrete in the histories of Muslim existence in the 70 years in India that is worth studying about what has been done or what has happened rather than through kind of theoretical paradigms. So I'm grateful for this work that the book has allowed to do. I want to raise a couple of questions for these are not questions meant for the author to answer, but simply as thought experiments for all of us. First of all, I think if this is a ideological movement, if the BJP is an ideological movement that requires a type of demonization. In other words, if it requires a Babri Masjid every, let's say, 30 years, right? Like every 30 years, you need an event, a catalyst event that you kind of ramp up to and then deal with the aftermath of. And in that sense, while this is a question of Islam's longer presence in South Asia or a particular version of that history, it does make me think that this is not about the civilizational harm, but this is the ideology of crisis. That is to say that the ideology requires a type of crisis crescendo making. The Muslims are, quote unquote, breeding too much. The Hindu woman is under threat. All of these are kind of languages of crisis. So there has to be a crisis. Now it manifests itself as a particular temple that was destroyed 4, 5, 8, 9,000 years ago. But that's what the everyday life importance of it is a sense of crisis as an ideological theme. Now that's kind of, I don't know, step one of fascism, right? Like fascism requires crisis as its functional mode of normalization of political violence. So the first thought that I had was, how do we kind of think seriously about the history of fascism for South Asia because of its, and especially about his ideas of racial purity, which again, one can read the Hindutva ideologies through especially its relationship to Dalit and Adivasi communities as a question of racial purity. And I don't, so again, it's not that RSS was fascist or is fascist, that's less important to my my thoughts here, but rather that if fascism is a politics of crisis, and the BJP has been engaging in a politics of crisis since mid 80s onwards, then what does that teach us about how to think about fascism? So that's the first thing that I wanted us to think about. The second thing is this question of as mentioned in the book and as mentioned here, Muslim is a problem. Now, I understand that Muslim is a problem for a problem of governance, a problem of politics for the state. But is Muslim a problem in and of itself? When we look at Pakistan and Bangladesh in a comparative model, we do see that the Muslim is a problem, even on those majority Muslim governed spaces. And there, the Muslim problem manifests itself as the right Islam that threatens the normative Muslim is a problem, right? So we have the Shia, we have the Ahmadi, we have the kind of Wahhabi or Taliban versions of Islam. But in other words, those two countries in a comparative mode does not get rid of the sentence Muslim is a problem. They add more data to this question, and with that, I wanted us to kind of think about the question of what and how far does the Muslim subject go. And by that, I mean, when we look at the economic data and when we look at socio-cultural profile, one great point the book makes is the lack of urbanization, migration and urbanization in the Indian Muslim community that Rehman points out, and the resultant kind of depression of upward mobility. Pakistan is incredibly, Pakistan doesn't do census too often, but there recently has been done a census. So we can at least compare 97 to 2024 or 20. And it appears from the data that there's incredible rate of urbanization, perhaps like the fastest in the South Asia. Now that urbanization has contributed not to the kind of upward mobility, but rather has contributed to this kind of question of the Muslim problem in the urban sites, blasphemy, questions of blasphemy, riots, question of class politics. And so the question that I was lingered on as I was reading Shikwai Hind was that how precisely are we to define the Muslim as a subject of these demographic and socioeconomic stages? And where exactly can we say that the ideology or ideological frameworks are coming from? The question of, used to be, since Hunter was mentioned in the book, used to be you thought about education. So the education was the primary function, and the education was meant to create a Muslim citizen, colonial subject, and then citizen, national subject, who could see the world in different ways than supposedly what the education, the non-educated Muslim cannot see. It doesn't seem to be the case that education makes a great shift, either, again, if we think comparatively between Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India. Class, however, does seem to be an indicator of many of these types of politics. So it's upward mobility, it's economic uplift that does seem to shift. Again, drawing upon Pakistan's census data about the usage of certain types of ideas of subjectivity, and so again, this is a old hat for some theorists of South Asia, which is the question of class over religion. This is also intersects with the newest scholarship which is coming up, which is about kind of the interactions between Dalit histories and Muslim histories, not as comparative, but more as a question of political futures. Ambedkar is cited a number of times. Ambedkar, of course, I think has some significant issues with the Muslim subject as opposed to the Dalit subject. But the Dalit question and the Muslim question do seem to be resonant in my reading of this book and of the various scenes, if only to create a critique of the Hindutva kind of ideology, if only for that purpose, that it allows it a benchmark from which to critically engage, which does not to say that there aren't Dalit leaders who are Hindutva, et cetera, just as there are Muslims who are invested in the Hindutva project. So this isn't about religion per se, but this is about an analytical perspective that I think allows us to engage with a fascist ideology that is an ideology of crisis in writ large. So those were some of the thoughts that occurred to me. I think this is an incredibly important book. It's important not only because of the perspective that the author brings, but it's also important because it's the first time I've seen a very, very nuanced kind of engagement with both the kind of 70s and the 90s. So a lot of times political theory looks at the 90s, let's say looks post-Ayodhya, post-Gujarat, leaving aside the question of the 70s, so between Nehru and Indira Gandhi. I think that's an incredibly critical period for us to understand. And secondly, the book does spend a lot of time in the South to help us really see through Karnataka, Kerala, etc. Again, as thought experiments for what the future may be, either as an egalitarian, anti-caste, a Brahmanical future, or as a future where the BJP is in power, and what possibilities. So overall, I'm really, really grateful to the author. I think it's a tremendous work, and I submit my thanks to him for this piece of scholarship. Thank you.
Wonderful, wonderful commentary and concluding remarks. And now we will go into question and answer session. Before that, there is an announcement for the coming Saturday. Rafat?
Shall I quickly answer very brief?
Just a second, just a second. We go as per our format just after this announcement. So upcoming Saturday, we have this revolt of 1857 in Delhi, new insights from Urdu poetry, newspapers and memoirs. The speaker is Dr. Swapna Lide, who is a historian, art curator, heritage conservator in Delhi. And she will be joined by another well-known author, Rana Safi from Delhi, who is a historian, author, and podcaster. And concluding remarks will be given by Dr. Rakesh Bhatbayal from JNU. So over to Dr. Rafat Hussain for moderating the question and answer session. Rafat?
Thank you, Dr. Raziuddin. Before we begin the question and answer session, please go ahead, Dr. Rehman. You wanted to say something?
Yeah. No, thank you so much for such generous comments. And some of the questions that you raised are very theoretical in nature. So obviously, given that age is on my side, so I hope to go back to these formulations 10 years down the road once India also experiences some post-Modi moment of Hindu right politics. And, so I would certainly think deeply about some of the questions, but I just wanted to have quick answers to some of the observations that you made. First is this something that is very surprising with respect to the place of religion, that on the one hand, one comes across that there is all these things happening to Muslims. On the other hand, Indian state, a lot of Muslim countries are giving their highest award to the Prime Minister, right? Narendra Modi probably is emerged as the most anti-Muslim Prime Minister in Indian public political discourse. But here he also, like half a dozen of Muslim countries have given him the best honors. And how to understand that? So my straightforward answer to this is that clearly there are two policies. There is one policy towards Muslim world, and there is another policy towards Muslim citizens. So that's very clearly defined about it. So it is in the irony of this that we come across this about it. So one has to, I would not say that the religion is entirely, but it is the love for Hindu state and its growing stature and how to negotiate it with all kinds of things which are not, because it is quite apparent there are not many Hindu states outside India with whom you can negotiate for trade, for other things about it. You can use your card and play that about it. Likewise, with respect to Christian community, how they're negotiating with all of that. There is a lot of effort, in fact, to reach out to Christian community in different parts of India by the BJP. So that clearly requires some theorization. So when one looks at Indian politics, so just on the other side, Gandhis are very secular people in their own personal life, if you look at them, in their marriages, in their personal listings about it. But if you look at their politics, or the politics of the Congress party, it's not always secular. Had it been always secular, then the story would have been very different. So one comes across this kind of, different approaches by the ruling elites and how they try to address different situations and all of that. So it is in that context that one has to look at the puzzle. The other thing is with respect to this fascism thing. Ever since the Ayodhya movement, a lot of historians and scholars have compared the rise of called the Hindu nationalism is as part of fascism. Now, one of the questions that I have asked, since last 40 years almost, since late 80s till now, that scholars have always said, oh, there is fascism. On the other hand, one comes across that BJP is becoming increasingly popular. So what is the conclusion that we draw? That BJP, of course, on the other hand, BJP is being embraced by Indian voters. And now, should we say that Indian voters are embracing fascism? Or should we say they are not really aware of what fascism is? About, you have a society where you have 30-40% of people probably cannot locate where Germany is. And if you mention Adolf Hitler, they may say he's a cricketer. People are so illiterate or not that knowledgeable about it. So it's very important. Or how do we try to look at the question of caste domination and caste exclusion compared to fascist politics? East caste politics is another form of fascist politics. So people are in any case familiar with it, so they are not really scared of it. Because the purpose of attacking BJP as a fascist politics or as part of fascism project is basically to scare voters. That don't vote for it. If you do it, this will happen. So I think that requires a bit of thinking, and so it's important to draw these interconnections in order to make sense of this otherwise very, very complex phenomenon. But what Hindutva politics has done to Muslims is this. Now, coming back to your early comments with respect to African Americans and others, is this, that it has, just as racism had forced or has created self-hating African Americans. Like, why am I an African American, or why am I a black person if I have to face so many problems? So Hindutva has done almost the same with Muslims. Even educated Muslims in India today. It is a small example. The first phone call I received about the book, praising this book, was from a very distinguished Muslim citizen of this country, very known Muslim citizen. And I was in the airport and I suddenly received this call. And he said that, I have read the 3 chapters and I've been asked to review this book, and I'm going to, and I really like it. So that's why I called you to congratulate you. And then he never wrote the review. The review never appeared. So after 4 months, 3 weeks ago, I bumped into him at a social event. I said, I was looking forward to your review because it looked to me that you were very excited and you liked the book. Then he said, yes, I liked the book. I wrote the review and then I gave it to my wife and she looked at it and she said it's very Islamophobic. or it's so, so I have decided I will not publish this review. So what I can do is this: I like the book, but I'm going to give you the draft. You look at it, but don't use my name. So I have the draft of that review. And so that has happened to Muslims when I come across. One of the compliments I've been receiving is this, that it's very brave on your part to write this book. So what is so brave in an educated society and all of it? So Hindutva has done that whole politics, and that is likely to do more and more. There will be social repercussions and how Muslim identity is going to be saved because of this onslaught and all of that. So that's apart from the fact that there is this exit strategy by middle class, upper middle class Muslims to run away from India and looking for abode elsewhere and all of that about it. So that's another consequences. So I suggest that one of the tasks of future secularism is also to rescue the Hinduism from Hindutva, because it has also changed Hinduism in a big way. So these are all tentative comments I have to your comments, and we can go to the Q&A.
Thank you, Dr. Rehman. Let's move on to the question and answer session. So before we begin it, I'd like to thank all 3 speakers, Dr. Rehman, Dr. First, and Dr. Ahmed. Thank you so much for your input. And please raise your digital hand, and you can show your interest in chat box. I don't know, Razi bhai, whether the chat box is active or we have blocked it. But anyway, we have questions from digital hand. So first one is from Imtiaz Saab. Please go ahead, Imtiaz Saab.
Thank you. Thank you very much for taking my question. Thank you, Professor Mujibur Rehman, for your informative and insightful presentation. It is rightly said that future is more than unknown for we humans. It is uncreated. What are the Muslims of India doing to create a good future? In this context, I should mention that knowledge, character, and thoughtful actions empower, and they are the destiny. Does your book cover any remedial actions for the turning around of the dismal situation of Muslims in India?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's collect a couple of questions together. It'll be easy.
Please go ahead, because there are not too many. So there may be different nature.
There is a Syed Amir, somebody has raised a hand. Yeah.
Yes, I see that. Okay,
Okay.
Amir bhai, do you want to ask the question of similar nature?
I'm trying to put my video on. I'm getting a little.
Well, the
Try to start your video because the host has stopped it.
No. You can do that. I have.
Well, I'm struggling with. Anyway,
turn it on. Yeah.
Yeah. So my I admire the author, Dr. Manan Ahmad, and the other speaker. Very thoughtful discussion and account. So I am more kind of a question. It's not really a question. I'm more of, I wonder, the situation in India for the Muslims is not unique in the sense is that other countries also use this formula. If you want to unite a disparate country which has a number of different religions, ethnicities, then what you do is to unite one group which seem to be opponent to your aspirations against the rest of them. I see India using Muslims as that instrument. I see in Israel also, which is very diverse in terms of ethnicities, blacks and Russians and Europeans origin and all that, but they're all united in the face of opposition from Palestinians because there is a visible opponent there. So you can marshal other forces against that. That might work in India for a while, that works in Israel. Now, the question is, so I don't know how you will, India used to be much divisions against the caste system. I see, although I may not be as familiar with it as Dr. Mujibur Rehman is, that is degree suppressed. The division based strictly on the line of caste system. Now, one thoughtful question Dr. Manan Ahmad raised, which I found it very pertinent, is the Muslim problem. For example, as you said, in Pakistan, there are no Hindus or Christians or anybody else. So what we are doing is now there's a division against Muslims or Ahmadis and Shias and Qadianis and Wahhabis and all kinds of things. So situation isn't that much improved, although there are no non-Muslims or not significant number of non-Muslims. So how do you get rid of that problem? That is also a problem. So thank you.
Yeah. Should I go ahead?
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Now, let me just start the last question because I think that's an observation that Professor Manan Ahmad raised with respect to how to address the Muslim situation in Pakistan and Bangladesh and connect with all of it. For me, the concern was more with respect to the minorities. For me, I was trying to compare non-Muslim minorities in Pakistan and non-Muslim. One of the questions I asked that if things are going wrong with Muslims in India, how wrong it could be in future? And what are the empirical evidences that we can gather and learn lessons from, and how to fight back? So it is this broader concern took me to the question of African Americans. And I was not saying that African Americans and Muslims are completely identical, but I had mentioned a couple of features, and that took me to the minorities in Pakistan and in Bangladesh. And that took me to the Dalit question, how the Dalits were treated. When Ambedkar was fighting this situation or was dealing with the caste question, and I read this and I'm not able to trace it again, when he came back and joined Baroda as a lawyer, and he faced a lot of discrimination. What he noticed in Baroda is this: upper caste Hindu lawyers and Muslim lawyers were very friendly. And whereas they were all very discriminatory towards him, they were not, he was not dining with them, they were not socializing with him, and he obviously had difficulty in finding the accommodation, and eventually he was identified. He was leaving taking a Parsi name, hiding in a hotel, and he was identified and was thrown out. And he left eventually, was told to be, and he went to the Baroda king. He said that, I'm not able to find accommodation in Baroda because I'm a Dalit, nobody's giving accommodation. So if you don't give me an accommodation, how can I work for you? Because he had this contract. Baroda, King of Baroda, had funded his education abroad. So he had to come back and serve King of Baroda. So then the King of Baroda said, well, you know, it will take time. I can't find an accommodation for you. So then he had to quit Baroda and go, and went back to Bombay. And he sat outside that hotel and cried, and then he left. Now, while describing all of this, he raised this question. He said the reason why there is not so much of violence against Muslims is because Muslims are organized. Muslims are in a position to retaliate, whereas we Dalits, we're not organized. So we're not able to challenge and retaliate and all of that about it. That's how he does the comparison. So eventually he comes out with that famous slogan, educate, organize, agitate, you know, that famous slogan. Now, you know, one would be surprised, had Ambedkar been alive today, how he would have looked at the Muslim condition, you know, because this is considered worse than what Dalits are facing, because when there is an attempt to take away reservation by some groups of BJP, Dalits cutting across party lines, Dalit MPs and MLAs, they get together. And you don't see that kind of solidarity among Muslim MPs about it. You know, I'll just give you one quick example of that. In the month of December 2022, 30 Muslim member of parliaments got together. And I was one of the person who was invited to join them to discuss how the Muslim issues could be debated in parliament. All right. And when I was asked to intervene, and I said, well, the Supreme Court has come out with this judgment that there should be a separate law on lynching. And this judgment came in 2018. 9 months after that judgment, Supreme Court came out with another judgment, which is about Ajodhya judgment. And now we have a temple of Ajodhya standing there, Grand Temple. Now the government took no action to come out with a separate law on lynching, right? And there was no concern shown by opposition political parties either, right? In all these years. So I said to this gathering of 30 Muslim member of parliaments of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, I said, why don't you simply write a letter to the Home Minister and ask him that what has happened to the Supreme Court judgment and why the government is, what steps the government has taken. And you'll be surprised, nobody took interest. Nobody. It had some of the most prominent Muslim politicians sitting there. And I eventually had dinner with Mr. Badruddin Ajmal, who is a prominent figure of Assam politics and all of it about it. But nobody took this interest in this about it. So you don't come across the sort of solidarity among Dalit, whether they're in BJP or in other political parties, with respect to Dalit questions. You don't see that solidarity among Muslims or Muslim member of parliaments. That's quite apparent about it. And that's a very disappointing thing about it. So obviously class dimension is one dimension through which one can look at it. You know, in other words, why, you know, this goes back to a bigger question, which is the relationship between Islam and democracy. You know, is there a relationship, you know, is Islam, you know, inherently not hospitable to democratic ideas and all of that about it. So those are all bigger theoretical questions, but I have approached it from the point of view of minority rights and what happened to religious rights and all of that about it. And so, yeah.
Let's move on.
Yeah, let's move on.
So I'm gonna to lump a couple of questions from the chat box. One is from Nadeem Khan Saab. What can be the roadmap of Muslims of India towards political relevance under present circumstances? And the related question you addressed a little bit is from Tanveer Ajaz. Why can't Muslim find solidarity with the Dalits and other marginalized sections? And the third one is from Sami. What are Dr. Rehman's comments about the RSS chief comments about living together and not looking for temples under each mosque? Is it not part of the phased policy, saying one thing for the global consumption and the other for the local implementation to the Muslim community? So there are three questions. So,
excuse me, this is Imtiaz. My question is not addressed yet.
Yeah, the same question, what Muslims are going to do, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I'm going to. He stopped me. I was stopped, so I could not. I'm going to address. Well, I have addressed that. The conclusion chapter basically deals with what Muslims should do and what is the way out, and that is how the section is titled. So I would definitely request those who have interest to buy the book and read it. But I'm going to, in any case, say this that what Muslims should do. And one of the things Muslim must do is to, one of the encouraging aspect of the 2024 election result is that there was a perception that Hindutva politics has taken over India, and all Hindu voters are voting for Hindu parties. So we are in a point of no return. So that particular myth was blown away with the results of 2024, because despite building this grand temple, BJP was unable to, do well in the heartland of Uttar Pradesh, and which basically says that there is still opportunity for secular politics, that Hindutva does not have a complete control or grip over Indian voters. And I have argued it in my Rise of Saffron Power book, that this argument that RSS has got complete control and can walk in and campaign and help BJP win, that's a myth. Indian voters are not under the control of any organization, including RSS. And my most important and prominent example of that is New Delhi, the only state where BJP and Hindu right has a long history. Long before BJP came into existence, you had a significant force, significant organization of Bharatiya Janata Sangh in Delhi, and L.K. Advani basically operated from Delhi. And even here, the way that our party was able to defeat BJP, Modi, few months after 2014 election, enormous amount of financial investment, similar kind of grand style of campaign, and still could not touch two figures in assembly about it. And it was repeated again in 2019. Same happened in case of Bihar, when Lalu and Nitish came together. There was this huge story, that RSS is everywhere and campaigning and they're going to take over and all of that about of it. And now all of these things have been said about of it. So I am not somebody who has bought this particular argument, which is often made with respect to RSS, that it has got the secret and can walk in anywhere before the elections, 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and can get the results. These things about it. It did not happen. It didn't happen in Karnataka. It didn't happen in Himachal Pradesh. One can go on and on and on about of it. And wherever opposition has been able to organize and conduct a proper campaign, and they have been able to defeat BJP. So therefore, BJP is definitely not invincible. Mr. Modi, he can be defeated. And there are plenty of these things about of it. And imagine, even in 2024, if Odisha had not gone, if you ask me, because I come from Odisha, so I know the politics very well, the only reason why BJP was able to succeed because Congress simply abandoned last 15 years or so. Rahul Gandhi was busy giving interviews to Asutosh Basni than going and campaigning in Orissa about of it. If you had done that, then BJP would have lost 20 seats. And you think of it, what kind of government we would have today. So one has to pay attention to that part of it. Now, coming back to the question of, so therefore, what Muslims must do, and of course, the solidarity part of it, not just with Dalits, but also with secular upper caste Hindus. That's what the broad coalition. That's what I talk about of it. There are a lot of upper caste Hindus who vote for BJP not because they are Hindutva-badis, but because they have other reasons why they are not very happy with Rahul Gandhi, they're not happy with Mamata Banerjee, or they're not happy with somebody else. That's why they're voting for it, Akhilesh Yadav. So they're voting for it. So there are a lot of still, they're not actively secular people, but they're not really communal people. And a lot of my classmates coming from some of the finest schools and colleges, from Doon School, St. Stephen's, they're all Modi fans, but they're not communal people. Not in their real life about of it, but they just don't buy this vision of secular India and authoritarian India and all of that about of it. So a broad coalition definitely is necessary, but that coalition could only be done by secular political parties. And it's a political movement, it requires a political response. Thus, unfortunate dimension of or aspect of this is Indian secular political parties are half-hearted, they're ambivalent, they are confused. You don't see much commitment towards secular inclusive India. Sometimes rhetorically, as you know, that Rahul Gandhi even does not mention the name Muslim during his tour in US When I was part of this discussion after Karnataka election, the lady who was invited for Hindu for Human Rights mentioned about it, and in this particular platform. So we have all those problems. I think the problem lies largely with the secular political parties and fragmented and all of that about it. Now coming back to the RSS chief Mohan Bhagwat's statement. One of the intelligent statements that Rahul Gandhi once made, which was some 5-6 years ago, when he was traveling in Europe, he compared RSS with ISI, the Islamic this things about it. So that raised a great deal of concern back in India among BJP and in RSS. And then RSS chief came to Delhi, I think sometime around 2019, or something around that time. He came to Delhi and he addressed a 3-day conclave where diplomats of 60 countries were invited. And he addressed them to explain what RSS really stands for and what RSS is. And there he made a statement that Muslims have a place in Hindutva. And this was seen as a very positive statement by a lot of people, including media. And I was asked by a number of media groups to explain that. I said, that looks okay to me, that Muslims have a place in Hindutva. For me, the real question is what kind of place that Muslims have. That's important, right? For instance, Dalits have a place in Hindu society, but thousands of years, they are the people who are told to live in one corner of the village, had to do things what upper caste would decide to do or what Brahminical order wants them to do. So they also had a place, excluded, marginalized, full of violence and all of that about it. So therefore, it is not just that Muslims have a place, but do they have a place as equal or not? That's the central question. So, so when a lot of these statements for instance, Mohan Bhagwat with respect to temple, he did make that statement. We can't go around looking for Shiva Linga beneath all mosques. But then, he does not do anything beyond that after making that statement. He's a chief of a big organization. He does not go to that particular court and case, and he does not meet those people while they're filing cases, or he does not say that that Worship Act of 1991 need to be defended, have to be protected, that's sacrosanct. He does not make all of those statements about it. So it's just one statement, then he disappears about it. And then, 3 weeks ago, they have come out with this term, which I mentioned about civilizational justice. Now, he has nothing to say about civilizational justice. I'm going to write a piece, opinion piece on that very soon on this about it, that how it impacts the entire discourse about it. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Rehman. You have covered all three. And thank you so much. Next is from the raised hand, Hassan. Hassan Saab, Hassan's iPad.
Assalamu alaikum. Dr. Rahman has obviously brought out very comprehensively the issues and challenges facing Indian Muslims. And Dr. Mannan has offered some very valuable insights. And Dr. Fierst gave a very good introduction. Now, peering into the solution space, my question is, what role can the Indian Muslim diaspora, of which most of us are members, play in trying to help the situation back in India?
Yeah.
Thank you, Hassan sir. Yeah, that's the only question right now. Please go ahead, Rahman sir.
Well, you see, one of the major source of support that the Hindu right enjoys is the Hindu diaspora. It's a very, very significant support base, and that support base is gradually increasing. Okay. It's not diminishing, and they support it. And most of them happen to be the tremendous beneficiary of the diversity project of the Western societies, whether United States or England and elsewhere about it. And that's why I mentioned this, that you have Rishi Sunak, you have Anita Anand, and you have, or even Kamala Harris. They are all rising in the political sphere, whereas Muslims are taken out. The people, those who benefit in Western societies, do not want to defend the same principle back home. So they want to be multiculturalists, the guys like Vivek Ramaswamy or someone, all of this about of it. So the benefit over there of diversity, which is in another form secularism or multiculturalism, but they do not want to stand for it. They stand for vegetarianism back home about of it. So how to bring these people back to stand for something out of which they directly benefit? And I think that's where Muslim diaspora probably could play a role. Of course, a lot of people would say Muslim diaspora because they are doing well financially, so they should make investment, because Muslims have a problem, which is the education, and that is the reason why all this problem is. So those who say Muslim problem is primarily because they have economic problem or their education problem, they don't understand that this problem is political. Even if you are well off, you are well educated, and you are going to be lynched because you eat beef. So they're not going to leave you just because that you are educated. So they're not going to spare you for that. So there is a political problem. The political problem is that the Muslims should have rights, the way the diaspora has got rights back in other countries, right? So then different forums through which one could make advocacy for all of this about of it. It is true that a lot of Western governments are generally aware of all the things that are happening, the bad things that are happening in India. But most of them are not in a position to confront Indian state because Indian state is too indispensable for them in terms of trade and others about of it. So you come across a very dual-faced approach by the Western states. So once in a while, if there is some activist, say Jubair was arrested, so then the German foreign minister make a statement, things like that about it. Once in a or the symbolic thing like American president asks the journalists, ask about Muslims and things like that about it. But you don't really come across any significant interventions by these governments. So how diaspora could be able to operate in all of that about it? And so that's the big challenge. So the role of the Indian diaspora would be very, very limited. And I don't see that they're going to play any big role in terms of, because if you play a big role, then there is this chap, Tavlin Singh's son, who is a very famous writer, writes for New York Times, I forgot his name. They took out his OCI card. He wrote a hard-hitting article on this lynching case about of it. So you will be prepared to pay the price. And so you have to, so that's the dilemma. But I think is that if that's why the secular upper caste Hindus could play a far more effective role if they become critical and they become, these things about of it. The possibility, because Indian diaspora is largely, the Hindu diaspora is largely upper caste diaspora. It's not, there is hardly any Dalit in that about of it. So you have to understand that, and that's I think I should write a paper, the role of diaspora in restoring a democracy or defending in secularism and things like that.
Thank you, Dr. Rehman. Two more raised hand, one after another, Abdul Jabbar Saab and then Nazir Ahmed.
Sir, thank you. Fantastic discussion as always. I have a parochial question here because I'm coming from Tamil Nadu. You mentioned something different about Southern Muslims in passing. So I think apparently I've written a chapter on it. Can you briefly kind of explore what kind of features the Southern Muslims have as opposed to other parts of India?
Yeah.
Thank you. Nazir Saab, please go ahead.
Okay. Shall I go ahead? Answer the question?
Yeah, you wanted to tackle both of them together or one by one?
No, let me just answer this. This is a very specific
question. Please go ahead.
Yeah, so southern thing is this first, the Islam in southern part of India, basically the 4 states that I study, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Telangana, Karnataka, and all of that. Islam spread through Sufism. So the relationship between local Muslims and local Hindus are very, very different. So I've given a vivid description of it, largely based on secondary literature that are already written about this. And so that's a major point of difference. Now the question is this, when Ajodhya movement happened, the significant or dramatic rise of BJP that took place in the North India, not in South. Right? Now, when the Pakistan movement was going on, Southern response was very, very lukewarm. There was hardly any response. That disturbed Muhammad Ali Jinnah very much. He decided to have some kind of an understanding with Periyar. In fact, he organized a conference with him, from the late 30s or so. Now, Periyar and Dravidian movement, the Jinnah and Periyar, they agree on one point. They agreed that Congress happens to be an upper caste party. Okay, and that was the major complaint of Periyar against the Congress party. So he did not celebrate India's independence. Periyar did not celebrate India's independence. Gandhi and Periyar are two people who did not celebrate 15th August 1947. Periyar did not celebrate because he said, the upper caste have got freedom, we haven't got the freedom. So now Periyar looked at Muslims as part of the Dravidian identity, right? So Periyar was working for a Dravidistan, right? So now Jinnah goes there and shares the platform with Periyar. And for the first time in his life, he does not talk about India and Pakistan. He says India had to go in three ways. There will be Dravidistan, and there will be Pakistan, and there will be Hindustan. So Jinnah conceded to Periyar on that part of it. So that's why I say there are two zones from where the maximum resistance against Hindutva movement or Hindu state will come. One from South, particularly the Periyar and his legacy, and the other is from Punjab and Sikhism. About it. The two major points where you will come across the extreme resistance to Hindutva movement. Now, when Ayodhya movement happened, and there was this dramatic and remarkable results, rise of BJP that took place, 89 seats. And there are the arguments by all kinds of scholars that, this Ayodhya theory is not going to work out in South. In fact, there is an essay in my volume of Rise of Saffron Power by a very accomplished scholar who taught at SOAS for many years, Institute of Commonwealth Studies, by James Chirian Kandat, that this is South, the way that America South is, India South is very unique about it. Now, I had this very weird encounter with the editor of Economic Political Weekly, Mr. Raj Krishna. And I was very anxious, and I go and visit him in Bombay, and he has this little cabin, and he gets upset. He said, India is too diverse. BJP can never make it. I still remember, he was very, very angry. He almost said, get out of my room. He was so angry. Now, by 2008, BJP forms the government in Karnataka. By then, Mr. Raj has passed away. The question is this: what a lot of liberals thought that BJP has only one strategy to occupy electoral power, right? But BJP came out with multiple strategies in different parts of India to deal with the situations. So they have one strategy in South, they have another strategy in North, and they're working very hard. The amount of investment BJP is doing in reaching out in South, specifically trying to mobilize Christians, because there is a animosity and competition between Muslims and Christians in Kerala, in Tamil Nadu, and all of it. And then isolate Muslims, and then use all kinds of ED-CBIs against all these regional political parties, and then co-opt them and all of it about it. They're working very hard. And like when
Mr. Rehman, please wrap up. We are on the top of the
It's a long chapter, so you can probably buy the book and read it.
Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, the last question is from Nazir Ahmad Saab. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Professor Saab, for a very illuminating lecture. I have two questions, inside looking out, if I may. If we look back at the decade of the 1980s, from 1980 to 1990, when I ran for election in Karnataka in 1979, the Janasangh party was a peripheral party. I won 80% by a margin of 80% in a predominantly Hindu constituency, or Hindu Muslim problem. What happened? We know all the positions that were taken by the Indian Muslims, Shahabuddin and so on. Question number one, was it a case of Muslims shooting themselves in the foot. In a galactic situation where people talk about civilizations and so on, and Professor Lesa briefly touched upon it, one has to be able to take bold decisions. The second question relates to how Islam itself is projected and presented. Isn't it true that Islam appeared as a spiritual, ethical movement for the transformation of the human? And isn't it true that it gradually developed into an intellectual and scientific movement? And then later, only later, came the military political aspect of it, especially in northern India. Everybody knows about Muhammad bin Qasim. But how many people know about the Chiraman Perumal temple in Karnataka? That was four centuries earlier. And in again, a global situation. Isn't it true that we are putting the horse before the cart? We talk about politics, we talk about all these issues that we come across, but Islam, we don't talk about it. Isn't it true that Islam is a spiritual ethical movement for the transformation of the human? And is it true that all the other peripherals are an offshoot of it rather than the other way around? Thank you, sir.
Shall I answer this? What's up?
Yeah, that's the last one. Please go ahead.
All right. So, the question, what Islam has done and likely to do or is doing, is a very different set of questions, very different ways of looking at it. So, with respect to what is unfolding in the name of Hindu majoritarianism and what is unfolding with Muslims, I'd like to ask, well, if Islam was so militant and violent and which bin Qasim and the rest, then what about Buddhism? Buddhism was not doing anything, but it disappeared, right? Who unleashed violence against Buddhists? So one has to understand the ideological dimension of Hinduism as well. The violent ideological dimensions of Hindus, then Aryans, and there are all kinds of questions that one can ask. Or for that matter, why should Dalits suffer as much as they have suffered in this country? Like, in what sense Muslims are responsible? Even today in modern India, if you open newspaper, virtually every day you will come across some kind of violence taking place against Dalits. And mostly they are all underreported. Vast number of cases are not reported, right? And if you do the research, you'll find out Muslims are not behind it. So there are different. Now the question is this: then how to explain the violence in India and all of that, and to what extent Islam and state power and all those histories could be a part of it. But I am taking a different approach altogether. And I am trying to ask, like, going back to the Janasangh thing, one small fact that I want to share with you. Many people do not know this, that when Janasangh eventually was merged with Janata Party under the leadership of Jayaprakash Narayan to launch anti-emergency movement, and then when that movement and the government failed in 1980 happened, and then the Congress came back, the Janasangh leadership was completely demoralized. They didn't want to revive at all, because those were the sad and depressing days for Janasangh in the electoral arena. One person was completely convinced that Janasangh brand of politics would not work in India was Atal Bihari Vajpayee. Vajpayee for months together was opposed to the idea of setting up a separate political party. You read the biography of L.K. Advani, autobiography, you will come across the detailed descriptions of it. It is the L.K. Advani who persuaded Atal Bihari Vajpayee, and eventually they came out with Bharatiya Janata Party, with Gandhian socialism and all of that stuff. And it gradually takes different shape after they join Ayodhya movement. Then BJP becomes different after a couple of years or so about it. So therefore, Janasangh was unwaned, was declining all over in Uttar Pradesh and elsewhere about it. Now the question is, secular politics was not rising because Congress had become family controlled and all of that about it. It's very important to understand that particular trajectory of right of Hindu right politics. So one of the point I try to make in my book, that when people are kind of arguing that Ayodhya movement and Uttar Pradesh is very central to the rise of Hindu right project and the way that it has become hegemonic, What people do not understand is this, that there is Gujarat, which was completely unaffected by partition, right? And RSS and BJP or Hindu right was able to convert it into a Hindutva laboratory. And if there were no Gujarat model, then there would have been no Yogi model. It was the Gujarat model that revived Modi model by Modi going to the Uttar Pradesh and then reviving it, because Uttar Pradesh BJP was unwavering about it in the 90s and all of it about it. So these are all very interesting questions, you know. So part of the questions that you're asking about Islam and all, I'll try to address them in my Islamophobia book. But you know, this particular book, I have looked at it from the point of view of Hindu nationalism and minority rights and all of that stuff. So I'd like to conclude it here.
Thank you so much. Thank you again, all the three speakers, Dr. Rehman, Dr. First, and Dr. Ahmad, for your time. And thank you to the all audience for spending almost more than 2 hours. Before we conclude, I will pass on to Dr. Raziuddin for his final comment or question. He always has a right to ask the question.
No, I think we have overdone this today, like more than 2 hours. Everybody's tired. A lot of questions been raised, answered, but you know, obviously there's much to ask, but I would rather not ask any question. Just a clarification, just to clarify you about these makeup of Indian diaspora, probably, or the Hindu diaspora you mentioned. Probably you are not either not very well informed, or it is not true. A lot of them are not, they are mostly coming from South. If you have to understand, the South dominates here as a Hindu diaspora. And
But
South,
upper caste again, upper caste.
Not necessarily. If you say upper caste, South doesn't have many upper caste. There is a limited percentage of upper caste in Southern Peninsula. Tamil Nadu doesn't have more than 2% Brahmins. So it is not true that all are upper caste first. They are middle caste maybe, but they are not BJP supporters, because most of the Southern Keralians, Tamils, or Andhrites or Telanganis are not BJP supporters, hardcore supporters. So the North has a limited effect, but the problem is, like you mentioned about the American congressman, you didn't mention about Ro Khanna, you didn't mention about Jayapal, you didn't mention about Harris, who are extremely progressive anti-Modi. They have nothing to do with the Indian Hindu diaspora, Hindutva diaspora. The problem with Indian Muslim diaspora is that they are just inactive as they are inactive in India. Here also the Muslims suffer from the same lethargy and the same problem, that their priority is on culture, identity, Sir Sayyid, Urdu, Mushaira, and this is a truth. They are very least concerned about active politics. And that's why you will see that there is very little effort to have approachment between the Hindu Indian diaspora and the Muslim Indian diaspora. Very little. They do approach each other, but they have not effectively shook hand to each other. There are progressive elements within the Hindu, Indian diaspora. So we have problem here too, as we have problem in India. So these are the certain comments. And thank you very much for the wonderful.
Thank you, everyone.
Oh, Dr. Rahman, please let the audience know where is your book available, because one of the comment there.
They're all available in Amazon. They're all available in Amazon, and most of them are Indian.
Amazon, yeah.
It's not on Amazon, somebody said. Please check.
It is Amazon India.
Oh, Amazon India. Okay, thank you.
Otherwise, when they visit India, they can ask their relatives or somebody to send a copy.
Thank you once again. Thank you, Dr. First, and for your time, and Dr. Rehman. Thank you.
All right. See you
Okay.
sometime. Okay. Thank you.